Hey guys, this is Nia and today I will be painting some mini spring flower doodles. I have a few of these in mind that I want to share with you guys, and this is the first 8. I love painting these so much. They're so easy, simple, and colorful, and you can really mix and match these flowers with the leaves so you can make your own patterns. So let's begin drawing these out first. For the first one, I want to draw out a simplified tulip with 3 rounded points at the top and finished off with a couple pairs of rounded leaves to match the rounded edge of the flower. Not all of these are based on real flowers, or at least I'm not too sure what they're called, so I'm just going to try to describe how I'm drawing these out. So for the second one, I'm going to draw a basic flower shape with the center and 6 really short round petals around the center, and finishing it off with 4 small leaves zigzagging the stem. Moving along to the third one, I'm going to be doing an upside down teardrop shape, and I'm going to build on that shape and repeat it. As we get towards the bottom of the flower becomes more dense until it comes down to a slight point again to where the stem will connect, and then I'm just going to add 2 thin leaves on each side. For the fourth one, I'm going to draw out a circle for the center and 7 thin long petals around the sides of the center, finished off with a couple of leaves in each side of the stem spaced fairly wide apart. The fifth flower is going to be a miniature hydrangea, so for these I'm going to do dots or small circles and bunch them all together to create a clump of flower, finished off with a big leaf on the left side. The sixth flower is going to be a closed rose from the side. The overall silhouette of this is similar to the tulip for the bottom part, but I'm going to separate the middle where the petal is folding across on the outside. And for the leaves, I'm going to add a couple of small leaves on each side. The next flower is going to be a 4-petaled flower. I make the petals to look like eye shapes, and since there are only 4 of them, I'm drawing them out quite large compared to the other ones that we've drawn out. I'm also going to add a small circle at the center and also 2 leaves at the bottom of the stem. For the 8th and final flower, I'm going to first draw out 3 medium-sized petals and 2 smaller ones in between, with a couple of medium-sized leaves along the side of the stem. Before I paint these out, I'm just going to show you the green colors that I'm going to use. So it'll be a mixture of 2 colors, which is Permanent Yellow Deep and Cerulean Blue. And what I'm going to do is swatch them little by little, adding more colors from one or the other, depending on which color you start with. And just with these 2 colors, you can create a variety of different tones of greens. So when we paint the flowers, I will just show you the colors that I'm going to use for the flowers without repeating for each of the stem and the leaves. The only thing you need to note is the lighter and warmer you want your green, the more yellow you can add. And if you want darker bluish green, you can add more cerulean blue. But because the cerulean blue is quite light, you won't be able to create a really rich dark green, and that depends on the blue that you use. So for instance, if you use phthalo blue or ultramarine blue, you'd be able to create darker tones of green. So try to experiment. In the next videos of these mini doodles that I plan on doing, I'm going to change the color combinations of the greens just so you can see different varieties. By the way, I will be using 2 brushes for this mini doodle painting. This is a size 2. If you use a larger brush, your flowers will just be a bit bigger, and if you use a smaller one, the flowers will become a bit smaller. And for the small details like the stem and the leaves, I'm going to be using my size 0 brush, or you can also use a liner brush. So once I'm done practicing and swatching the colors, I'm going to show you how I paint these flowers individually. For the first flower, I'm going to mix Jaune Brilliant and Queen Opera to create a nice pinkish peach color, and I'm going to paint it like how I first drew it out. Since it's small, it's alright to paint the outline first because we can move fairly quickly for this one. I want to make sure that the surface is not puddling, but just only slightly damp. If you do have a puddle on the surface, you can take off some of the paint with a clean, dry brush. And if it becomes a bit too light, you can build on the colors, but just wait for it to dry off a bit and be slightly damp. Then I'm going to add a touch more Queen Opera into the mix and add that to the bottom of the flower and let it spread by itself to create a nice gradation. Then I'm switching to a smaller brush. This is a size 0, and I'm going to use this to paint the stem and the leaves, as it comes to very nice fine point and it's able to make the stem very thin and delicate. For most of the stems, if the flowers are connected, I'm going to paint a very tiny triangle where the flower buds, and I'm just letting the green naturally spread upwards, creating a nice transition between the colors. For the leaves, I'm essentially drawing them out and coloring them with the paint. So nothing tricky, I'm just using the tip of my brush to paint the leaves. Moving along to the second flower, I'm going to be using two colors, which are Burnt Sienna and Permanent Yellow Deep. And I'm going to use the Burnt Sienna for the center of the flowers, and I'm going to use the tip of my brush to paint very small dots so you leave some white space here and there. And then I'm going to clean my brush thoroughly and switch to the Permanent Yellow Deep. Then I'm going to start painting the petals by drawing out circles around the center and then taking the side of the petal outwards to connect to the center of the flower. I'm going to let some of the center seep through some of the petals because I think it creates a nice touch. For the stem, I'm adding more of the cerulean blue to get a cooler green this time, and I'm painting this one straight down, like the previous flower. Then I'm going to add the small leaves, a couple on each side of the stem. The third flower will be a clump of small flowers. I'm not too sure what they are, but you can make different types just by making the overall silhouette thinner or wider or even more dense. So for this one, I'm going to be using a mix of ultramarine blue and mineral violet to get the cooler purple color. And I'm going to paint using single brush strokes to create the teardrop shapes for the small flowers. For this, we also want the surface to just be slightly damp and not puddling, just like the first flower. And I'm going to get the same color, but in a much thicker consistency than I'm going to paint on top of the damp surface to give a better dimension to the flower, making it less flat. Then to finish off for this one, I'm going to be painting a couple of leaves on each side, and this time I'm making the leaves quite long and thin. Moving along to the next flower, I'm going to be using rose madder and cadmium orange, and I'm first going to paint the center of the flower so it's easier to visualize the petals on the sides. I actually made a mistake while painting this one. I didn't spread the petals nicely apart, so I ended up adding another petal, but basically you want to just create thin leaf shapes for each of the petals for this because the area is so thin it would be easier to actually use the size 0 brush, but I just used my old size 2 brush which doesn't even come to a fine point anymore, so it was quite challenging. So if you're doing this one, I would definitely recommend using your smaller brush. I'm also letting the rose madder at the center of the flower flow to each of the petals. That's completely fine because after we've finished painting the petals, you can add more of the rose madder on top. Then I'm going to finish this flower off by painting the stem and 2 small leaves on each side. The fifth flower is the easiest one and my favorite one to paint. This is the Hydrangea, and for this I'm going to use Cobalt Violet Light and Manganese Blue. I'm going to start by painting dots and short strokes to create a round circle whilst leaving a lot of white negative space, and I'm using only the Cobalt Violet to start off, making sure that the circle is fairly even. And once you're happy, go ahead and clean your brush and then switch to the Manganese Blue, and you want to paint some of the blues here and there around where the surface is still damp and you're just naturally letting the paint mingle with each other. And then we're going to finish off with a stem and a big leaf on one side. The sixth flower will be the closed rose, and for this I'm going to mix Jaune Brilliant with Vermilion to create a peachy color, and keep mixing the colors until you get the shade that you like, and make sure that your brush is nicely covered. I'm just going to paint the shape straight up. It's easier to paint the larger area first and then adding the back petal afterwards. While the surface is still slightly damp, I will also add a touch of the thicker consistency of the same color along the top area of the flower. And then I finished it off with the triangular shape on the flower bud and bringing it down to the stem, and also adding a couple of small leaves on each side to finish the whole thing off. The second last flower for today is this 4-petaled one. For this I'm going to be using Cobalt Violet Light and Permanent Yellow Deep. And I'm going to first start off by painting each individual petals first. This one is fairly large, so it's much easier to control. Make sure that when the petals come to the center point, that the point isn't too thick. If the center is too thick, the flower will end up looking a bit bulky. While the surface is still damp, I also want to add a touch more of the cobalt violet on the corners of the petals, so it has a nice little detail. And once the center is slightly dried off but still a bit cold to the touch, then I'm going to take a very thick consistency of the Permanent Yellow Deep and let it spread at the center of the flower. And then I'm going to switch my brush again and pick up a green shade and then paint the stem and a couple of leaves along the side. For the final flower, I'm only going to be using one color, which is Rose Madder, and I'm going to take a medium consistency and paint according to what I've drawn out earlier. I'm going to begin by painting 3 petals initially, then I'm going to add a couple of the small petals in between the larger petals, and where the petals meet in the middle, I'm going to add a thicker consistency Rose Madder and let it spread naturally. And this time, if some part puddle up, I'm going to just let it be because I think it creates a nice contrast of value. And last but not least, I'm going to mix up a green color and I'm going to draw the tiny triangle of the flower bud on the bottom of the flower, and I'm letting some parts of it still flow to the red, and then I'm going to paint down to the stem and then finishing it off with a couple of leaves. Before I end this video, I have a small announcement. I'm just letting you guys know that my new Skillshare class is out. A few of you wanted to see a full tutorial on the toast painting that I did a few months back, and the class is finally done. It's quite a long one, around 1.5 hours. It took a very long time for me to put together, but now it's completely finished. So come and check it out if you're interested. If you haven't followed me on Skillshare yet, I will leave all the details in the description box. If you're not a member yet, you can get a free 2 months membership through the link. And now getting back to the flowers, those are my 8 mini spring flowers that you can mix and match. I have so many more of these in mind that I want to share with you guys, so let me know if you want to see them. Hopefully I can combine all of them in a playlist too, so I have a few playlists going that I can keep adding on to. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one and learned something new. I think out of all the flower tutorials, this is definitely my favorite one. Thank you for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!